The European Union has just rolled out an ambitious new rulebook for artificial intelligence. And in this explainer, we're getting right to the heart of it and asking the big question. When it comes to AI, who's really watching the robots?
Here's the fundamental problem. We absolutely need to test these powerful new AI systems in the real world to see if they even work. But what happens when a test goes wrong? How do you innovate without putting people at risk? Well, the EU thinks it's found the answer.
And that answer lies in a specific piece of the law, Article 76. Now, think of this less like a dry legal document and more like an official rulebook. It's for a new set of guardians who are now in charge of supervising some of the most advanced AI experiments on the planet. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll meet the official guardian for these AI tests. Then we'll look at the powers they actually have. We'll dig into why a tiny one-word change in the law makes a huge difference. After that, we'll zoom out to see the bigger picture. And finally, we'll tackle that constant balancing act between innovation and safety.
All right, first up, who exactly is this guardian? Well, it's an organization called the Market Surveillance Authority.
So, in every single country within the EU, there's a body known as the Market Surveillance Authority, or MSA for short. The new AI Act gives them a brand new and pretty critical job. They are now the official guardians, and they're responsible for overseeing any real-world tests of what the law defines as high-risk AI. Their entire purpose is to make sure these experiments play by the rules. Okay, so we know who the guardian is. Now let's open up their rulebook and see what kind of powers they actually have to make sure the law is followed.
Because let's be real, this isn't about just sitting on the sidelines and taking notes. The real question is, if an AI test starts to go off the rails, what can the MSA actually do about it?
Well, they have a very clear three-level response. First, they can order the company to modify the test. Maybe they need to change the data set or tweak some parameters. If it's more serious, they can suspend the entire test, hit the pause button while they investigate what's going on. And finally, as a last resort, if the risk is just too high and can't be fixed, they have the ultimate power to terminate the whole experiment, shut it down completely. So what would a serious incident look like? Okay, imagine a bank is testing a new AI to approve loans, and suddenly that AI starts denying people from a certain neighborhood at a much higher rate. That's not just a technical bug. Under the law, that's a serious incident because it's a potential violation of fundamental rights. That's the kind of thing that sets off an alarm bell and tells the guardian, okay, time to step in. But this power isn't unlimited. The guardian's actions have to follow a core legal idea in the EU called proportionality. This basically means it's all about a careful balancing act. The response has to fit the problem. You wouldn't terminate a massive test because of one tiny correctable error. That would be disproportionate. Any action they take has to be suitable, necessary, and fairly balanced against the company's right to develop new technology. This leads us to a really fascinating detail about how this law was written. It's all about the evolution of responsibility, and it shows why sometimes a single word can change everything. If you look back at how this law was drafted, you'll see something interesting. For over a year, from late 2022 all the way to March 2024, the text said that responsibility fell on the AI company and the user. But then, just before the law was finalized, there was a crucial last-minute fix. In legal terms, it's called a corrigendum, which is basically an official edit to correct a mistake before a law goes into effect. And that one correction changed a single word. User was swapped out for deployer. Now, I know that sounds like a tiny change, but in the world of law, it is a huge deal. The word user is incredibly broad. I mean, in that bank example, who's the user? The teller typing in the data? The person applying for the loan? It's ambiguous. But deployer, that's specific. That's the bank, the actual organization that is putting the AI into operation. And the impact of that is crystal clear. This one-word swap created an unbreakable chain of shared responsibility. Now, the guardian can hold both the tech company that built the AI, they're called the provider, and the bank that is running the test, the deployer, both legally accountable. There's no more pointing fingers. It's clear whose job it is to fix a problem.
So now, let's zoom out for a minute, because Article 76 doesn't just exist on its own. It's actually one part of a much bigger, interconnected web of digital laws in Europe.
For instance, if an AI test uses any kind of personal data, boom, it immediately has to follow the strict privacy rules of GDPR. If that AI is being tested on, say, a huge social media platform, then the rules of the Digital Services Act come into play. And of course, if it's connected to the internet, its defenses are judged by the Cybersecurity Act. It's this really complex, overlapping legal landscape. And when you look globally, the EU's approach really stands out. The US tends to regulate AI differently depending on the industry. One set of rules for healthcare, another for finance. China, on the other hand, has very strong state-led control. The EU is doing something different. They're building a system of what's called preemptive supervision. Put simply, they're trying to find and manage risks before an AI product ever gets released to the public.
And that brings us to our final piece of the puzzle, the fundamental tension at the heart of this entire law. It's innovation versus safety, the ultimate balancing act.
See, on one hand, the EU really wants to encourage innovation. The Act even creates these things called regulatory sandboxes, which are basically safe spaces where startups and smaller companies can experiment with a bit more freedom. But on the other hand, the number one goal is public safety. It's about protecting people from harm and making sure our fundamental rights are secure.
So the philosophy here isn't to hit the brakes on progress. Not at all. It's to guide it. This whole framework, with its guardians and its rulebooks, is really designed to build public trust in AI. The ultimate aim is to create a market where the most innovative products are also the most responsible ones.
And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. In this massive global race to build the future of AI, will the EU's safety-first, more cautious approach also turn out to be the most successful one?